Early this morning, it was announced that a bridge had collapsed in Pittsburgh. And I'm sure by now you've probably seen the photos. It is absolutely horrendous to see. 5 vehicles and a Port Authority bus for Allegheny County were both on the overpass when it collapsed in a Frick Park below the bridge at around 6:40 a.m. That bridge was last inspected in September, according to Mayor Ed Gainey. And we know previously, as we'll show the evidence for, that it was in horrendous condition at that point. Perhaps they were planning some sort of renovations, but despite the fact that it was inspected several months ago, that didn't happen, and we came very close to people losing their lives. Thankfully, at this point, so far, it doesn't seem to have been the case, although 10 people did suffer minor injuries and 4 people were taken to area hospitals. It isn't believed that any of their injuries at that point are life-threatening, but vehicles were destroyed, rubble rained down, gas lines were ruptured, and so sort of a big issue. For just 1 second, let's jump to this photo because this is a tweet from back in 2018. So several years prior to that inspection that was just alluded to, Dr. Kachansky here showed a photo from underneath that bridge, and you can see a huge amount of rust, as well as looks like steel beams that have fully rusted through. They're literally not connected anymore. Now, Dr. Kachansky acknowledges that there are some cables, but evidently those can only save you for so long. So look, this is terrifying. I know everybody is going to spend the next couple of days at least being worried about every bridge they drive over, every tunnel they go through. But Anna, I want to start with you. What was your reaction when you saw this morning?
Well, I mean, my reaction was, of course, first shock and just complete worry that people had died or were close to dying as a result of this. And as you mentioned, luckily so far, there are no fatalities. Hopefully it stays that way. But it also, of course, made me think about the number of bridges that have collapsed in like the past few years that barely got any media attention. This is a common occurrence in the country. It's not usually a bridge as large or important as this one. And I say that because it's one of the main bridges that's used, a favorite path to get to downtown Pittsburgh. So this isn't some small rinky dink bridge. It's a bridge that's utilized quite a bit to get people to downtown Pittsburgh. And I just think about the fact that this is such a common occurrence in smaller instances. And yeah, infrastructure is really, really important, which is why it was important for the Biden administration to focus on an infrastructure bill. I hate the way that it was pared down with all sorts of pro-corporate goodies in there, including privatizing public infrastructure. But when you really look at some of the main infrastructure that's in place in this country right now, most of it dates back to FDR era expansion in our economy. That's terrifying. And the fact that there's like a lack of real oversight in inspecting the bridges, inspecting the infrastructure to ensure that people remain safe, that's also incredibly worrying as well. I mean, you just see this deterioration in our institutions all around, and this is a good example of it.
100%. I was just gonna say that I think that, as someone who was very critical of only passing the bipartisan infrastructure bill, I think we see that even that was vitally necessary and important. And there are other goodies and good things in that bill. Something like $90 billion for public transportation. So let's be honest, given the state of things in the United States, that was a good bill. That being said, we need so much more. But this is, we're the supposedly the world's superpower. We got all the things, all the money. We drive the best cars and the most amazing access to consumer goods, and our bridges are collapsing. We don't need China to beat us. We're beating our own asses ourselves very, very easily. And you see it here. And also at the same time, Pittsburgh, as city after city, we roll out tax breaks for corporations. Please, please, please come give us jobs. Come give us jobs. Meanwhile, bridges are collapsing. What is being done with all those tax breaks? When we roll out the red carpet, you can't even take care of people. So it raises eyebrows, and it also means that we did a good thing in terms of actually even Republicans got on board with that infrastructure bill.
Yeah, and at the same time, though, we can acknowledge that in theory, you could have passed some version of that bipartisan infrastructure bill, giving money to things like bridge maintenance without also needlessly privatizing tons of our national infrastructure. So like we were forced to accept that because that's apparently the best the Democrats can do when they've unified control of government. But that doesn't mean that even that was absent some issues. And thankfully, in this case, specifically in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, there was, in theory, money that could have averted this issue if it had been passed earlier. Biden was going to visit Pittsburgh today, so amazing timing there. The cosmos is really working overtime. And he was going to talk about the fact that there was $1.6 billion from the federal government specifically to improve Pennsylvania's bridges. So I would allocate a bit of that to the replacement post haste if you could, but it's the amazing thing where like that bridge, in that specific bridge, was constructed in 1970. So it's existed for longer than the vast majority of the people watching this have been alive. And finally, money was given out to stop bridges like that and others from collapsing. It eventually happened. It took 4 years of a joke about infrastructure week during Trump. And then finally, after a year of debate, we got it done. Meanwhile, as we'll talk about later, like Russia goes on the border with Ukraine and we're like throwing hundreds of millions of dollars. And we did allocate money to the bridges, but there's still tons of other problems, tons of money that could have been allocated to, for instance, making our infrastructure more resilient against the threat of climate change. So maybe the bridges will be improved, but like, what about when the ocean's rising? Like, can we get Putin to station some tanks off the coast of Florida? Maybe then the money can go there and we can start to put up some levees and things.
I mean, what I've learned, especially in this past week, is even if an imminent threat doesn't exist, just keep repeating that it does exist and talk about immediately shame anyone who denies that it exists, and that's it, and just keep moving forward. And maybe, who knows, maybe the funding will be there. Maybe that's what we need to do, just continue repeating things. But in this case, we're talking about infrastructure that's really vulnerable, right? I mean, we're seeing it happen in real time. And to your point, John, about how quickly Congress is willing to allocate funding for weapons in Ukraine, it shows you exactly who the real players are in our political system, who actually gets a say, who's prioritized or what's prioritized. And it always goes back to corporate interests, right? When it comes to funding weapons manufacturers or private military contractors, that's always gonna take a priority as long as we have this system of legalized bribery in place. All of those defense contractors spend so much money on lobbying, and they're not doing it out of the kindness of their own hearts. They're not doing it because they genuinely think that it's their way of practicing speech in our democratic system. They're doing it to buy off politicians so they get massive contracts later. And we're seeing that play out right now. Who's advocating for or spending hundreds of millions of dollars each election season to improve our nation's infrastructure? No one.
Yeah.
I will just add, we should dream about another, federal works project. We should dream about that Green New Deal. We should dream about the climate core, that is embedded in the Build Back Better Act. And we should know that one day we can hopefully turn away from just corporate power, just turn away from, being at the behest of whichever corporation wants to give us some jobs in exchange for giant tax breaks and, these no bid contracts that are only making us less safe, where someone's got to get rich. What if nobody got rich? What if we all just got better bridges? So I do think that that's a worthy goal. It's important for us to sort of understand what we're fighting for. And my God, getting back to some FDR policies, putting people to work, giving them good jobs, union jobs to build climate resilience. Let's do it.
I just wanted to say one final thing. I decided to hold my nose and listen to Biden's speech today. And it was actually a really good speech, I have to say. I'm very critical of Biden, but he very clearly understands where Americans are focusing their attention right now, especially when it comes to, yes, the infrastructure. But he talked about semiconductors and how there's a factory opening up in Pennsylvania that will manufacture semiconductors, which of course there's a huge shortage of. It's another supply chain issue. And he focused on how much workers are gonna make in those new jobs producing the semiconductors. And we're talking about 6 figures. He said the average is somewhere in the 6 figures range, right? Which is good money. I'm curious, like, what's the median?
Yeah, I would say average.
Right, but nonetheless, I mean, I love the idea of focusing on manufacturing products here within our country. This is not a nationalistic thing. This is about, really bolstering our preparedness for things that we're experiencing right now, right? Like we were not prepared for the pandemic because of the fact that we're so reliant on this global supply chain, which of course is much more vulnerable than we had realized.
Yeah, I will close by saying, and bear in mind before I give you these stats, mostly to buttress an earlier point that Anna was saying, this is coming from effectively a trade group, a trade lobbying group. But according to this group, the United States has about 230,000 bridges collectively stretching 6,300 miles that need to either be replaced or undergo major repairs. That is effectively, if you were to put them end to end, I believe it's from about Los Angeles to Atlanta in bridges that need to be renovated. 46,000 bridges were deemed structurally deficient, the worst rating. And that group estimates the cost of the job to replace all of these at $164 billion, which obviously renovating tens of thousands of bridges is an incredible task. But that's not an incredible price tag in comparison to what we'll spend blowing up the bridges in other countries in the next year or so. I think we could manage it. And imagine, to renovate that many bridges, how many people would you put to work for a couple of years? Be pretty amazing. Maybe some positive economic results from that.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.